After 1 month of testing the Vapor 16 Elite, I can confidently say that it is in my top 3 vapors of all time. So initially I did a first look video where I wore these boots for about 30 minutes to an hour, just kind of testing them out, seeing how they felt, but that didn't really give me a good overall feel on how these boots would perform in general, and I'm very glad that I took the time to actually review these. I'm even gonna say that the Vapor 16 is a complete upgrade from the 15, and although I did enjoy the 15, it can't compete with the Vapor 16. It's just that much better, performs so much better, and just overall a better boot and a very fantastic performing boot. So let's break this boot down. With the Vapors and Superflies now having a grip knit coating, that leaves only the Tiempos not having grip knit. So 4 out of 5 of their boots now have grip knit, and considering that they've gone away from K-leather and just any sort of real leather boots, I would kind of assume that the Tiempo 11 or whatever it may be at that point might have grip knit as well. I hate to admit it, but I think the grip knit does really help when you're shooting a ball or trying to put any sort of swaz or any sort of real technique on a pass. And at first I always really thought that grip knit didn't do much. Maybe it helped a little bit, but after really playing in the Vapor 16 and even the GX2 recently, it just feels better to shoot a ball. I don't know why, but it does, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, I always thought it didn't, but it does. So the grip knit on the Vapor 16, I would equate more towards the Luna 1. The GX2 and the Phantom Luna 2, both are a bit thicker and feels just like there's more to the grip knit there, and that's not a bad thing, but this is a very, very thin upper. This is the thinnest upper they've ever done on a Vapor from what I understand and from what I've experienced, and it still does the job of grip knit, and this whole boot is actually not coated in grip knit. It's actually kind of heat pressed on, it looks like, at a just sharp angle, just down the sides of the boot there and there. So any major surface that you're going to make contact with the ball, you'll have grip knit there. So shooting, passing, first touch, if it helps first touch, everything is gonna be right there for it. And the one-piece upper atom knit is what it's called now. It's still a fly knit like material, except it's a lot few layers. I wanna say it went down from 5 to 3 or 7 to 5, somewhere in that range. And it's very, very thin. There's lots of holes in it, but so far it's been pretty durable, and I really can't notice the difference between the fly knit one-piece upper on the Vapor 15 versus this. I mean, you can tell by in hand that it's thinner, but when you're playing, it's not super noticeable, but it's definitely lightweight, and making that thinner fly knit material, the atom knit, just kind of, I think, is more towards pushing Nike's agenda of the thinnest upper on a Vapor or any speed boot they've ever made. The one bad thing about this upper is the kind of wrinkle zones, if we want to call it that. So whenever you have them on feet, you take a step like this, you can kind of see that the boot bunches up in areas. So I don't know if I'm gonna call it wrinkle or bunching, but it's just a kind of some gaps where the boot should be snug on your foot, and it's not. Now this is something that's a big problem with synthetic boots because of just how the material is made, and it's not a big problem in terms of performance, but it definitely just feels like the boot doesn't hug your foot as much, and that's something you kind of want from a speed boot, or at least I do, and kind of the whole purpose of speed boots is the lockdown's great, it's super aggressive, and they're meant for fast players. So it's there, it's not a big deal, but just keep your eye on that. For the sole plate, and Nike has gone with something called the Fast Traction sole plate. Now, I don't actually know if it's the Fast Traction sole plate because on Nike's website, it just says Fast Traction for where the sole plate section is. So it also talks about these wave-like patterns, and that's gonna be down here in the forefoot where the orange is on the sole plate, right below the air zoom unit. And the tallest of the wave-like studs has seen some wear. So that means it's at least long enough to kind of grip the ground, and in that little excerpt under the sole plate stuff on the website, they kind of mention that the middle stud is supposed to be as tall as the rest of the studs. Now, clearly it's not looking at it with my naked eye here, but it's a new aggressive sole plate. It's basically the same thing. I did get a little bit of stud pressure, which I will go into later. This is the FG sole plate, so it's not necessarily meant for turf, but I mostly wore it on turf just because there's mostly turf pitches around me. I do wear them on grass, but I feel for the most part, regardless of what most people say, a lot of people wear FG on turf, so it's okay. It did the job there. Like I said, there was a little bit of stud pressure. I didn't have any snagging or anything like that. No real issues with cutting, changing of directions, even though it is an aggressive sole plate. The studs are a little long, so I am getting an AG pair here real soon, and I'm excited to test those out, but for the most part, it did its job on turf. Grass, it was obviously better. And I actually did enjoy the air zoom unit this time around. In the past, I've really talked a lot of crap about the air zoom unit, but this time around, I didn't mind it. Once the boot was broken in, it felt a lot more comfortable, a bit more natural, And even though I'd probably still, if I had to choose between Air Zoom and not, I'd go without. It was a lot better this time. So if you're one of the few people who didn't like the Air Zoom unit, this time around, it feels a lot better, even though it's the exact same shape. As for lockdown, it's a speed boot, so that's something you're gonna value. It feels like the Vapor 16 does not have quite as much lockdown as you'd want from a speed boot. Now, this Vapor definitely feels a lot wider, and that is very nice for me, but the lockdown just feels off. It still feels like your foot slips around in the boot a little bit. I wore the Nike grip socks, which is an oxymoron because they're not good at all. They don't really grip anything. And my foot was slipping all over the place. When I wore my True Socks, it was definitely a lot better, but there was still some slippage. And if you cut really, really hard, you get a lot of stud pressure. And obviously that was when I was on turf. When I'm on grass, it's not nearly as bad. Still a little bit there for stud pressure, but on turf it's awful, especially when cutting really hard. And even though it still performs well on turf, that's one thing that's you just don't like. And it's these two outside studs here, depending on which way you cut. And just not a good look in my opinion. It's not great for a speed boot to not have the lockdown it needs. I had them pretty tight and still slipping around a bit. Now, at the end of the day, are you going to slip out of your boots? Is it going to cause you to slip and fall and lose a game or something like that? No, but for a speed boot, you want better lockdown. As for size and fit, I went with my normal 9 US, and I always wear this in Nike and Adidas and pretty much any boot. It fit pretty well lengthwise. Widthwise, it's a wider Vapor than we've seen in a very long time, so it fit a bit better widthwise. It still took a little bit of time to break in, but there was no actual pain or hot spots on the widths of my feet, which is pretty good because usually with Vapors, I always get them, and none of that at all, so that's pretty cool. Now, a friend of mine, the Boot Wizard, his name's James, he has a YouTube channel as well. He noticed that some of the Vapors are a lot more narrower, so even in the heel, they're not as wide. In the toe box, I believe they're not as wide, and that is the light blue pair. So he had a pair of the Bowermans or these Blueprints pack, I believe, and then he held them side by some other pairs. So that's not very great, because if I want to test out another pair or colorway, they're probably going to be way too narrow and really uncomfortable. I don't know why Nike did this, and I don't know why this sometimes happens where some boots feel differently. And I know for the Vapor 15, my friend has a few pairs. He said some of the colorways fit different, so I think this kind of confirms that to be true. Why they're doing this, I don't know. Maybe it's different factories getting the molds and shapes a little wrong. Maybe it's some other factor, but just be careful with that. So just because I'm saying this feels like it fits wider, you get this model in a different color, and it's and you come to me and you say, hey, this is very narrow, why did you tell me this? That is a thing that's actually happening, where some of the boots are kind of different shapes and sizes. So not cool at all. If you're wondering how comfortable your feet are gonna be, as long as they're not super, super wide, you're gonna have a pretty decent time. The Air Zoom unit is supposed to provide a lot more cushion, and it kind of adds to some sort of comfort, but I don't think it's a game changer. The cushioning in the back of the heel here is very, very nice. I really do like that, and they've actually made the heel on this model super collapsible and super, super loose, and there's no crazy structure. Most of the structure comes at the very bottom of the heel here. So if you're somebody who struggles with blisters a lot, I think you're gonna be okay. The padding in the heel area is pretty much top to bottom, super, super soft, and overall a very comfortable boot. I would not think you're gonna have any sort of real issues with these, other than that stud pressure I talked about, which is for the most part on turf. So as long as you're not wearing these on turf, you're not gonna have any real discomforts. And you know, break-in time I would say is gonna be around 2.5 hours. It is a kind of really thin synthetic material, but that means if it's thin, it's gotta be tough. So it's a little bit harder to break in and kind of mold to your feet. But once you do that, absolutely no issues besides that stud pressure, and overall for a Vapor, it's pretty comfortable. In the past, they really haven't been. The last thing I'll leave you with is going to be the durability. For a Vapor, and wearing them a month, they're doing pretty well. There's no real thread damage. I don't have any tears. I didn't catch a stud on them. And for being a thin boot, the durability is there for once. And I'm actually quite surprised that a pair of Nike boots has lasted me this long, because the quality's been garbage lately. And no sole separation. The only real wear I have is gonna be on the sole plate, with the shiny kind of holographics fading away a little bit, and then just some wear in the plastic on the toe. But overall, very durable boot. So even though I had to pay $300 for these, which is a crazy price for a pair of boots, they're holding up so far like a $300 pair of boots should. So my overall thoughts are, well done, Nike. I mean, I haven't seen them do a vapor this good in a long time, and I don't know if it's because the grip knit makes it not feel like a vapor, or they've just actually for once cared about their consumer, but I haven't really liked a vapor like this since the Vapor 11. I mean, the 12, 13, 14, and 15, in my opinion, were just all subpar. And earlier in the video, I mentioned that this was in my top 3, and that's probably going to be between the Vapor 9, the Vapor 11, and the Vapor 16. Those 3 vapors to me are pretty solid boots overall. The Vapor 11 definitely takes the cake, but this is close, and I'm just glad that they're, you know, not falling apart. They seem to be fairly comfortable. You know, I mentioned this briefly, but this collapsible heel is also super nice. You know, the thin upper, if you really like a good touch on the ball, you've got it with these. And you know, the only other thing I could say is maybe a less aggressive sole plate, but that's what the AG boots are for, and I'm getting a pair soon, so I'm excited for that. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you like football boot facts, knowledge, reviews, anything like that, please make sure to check out the rest of the channel. There's a ton of cool videos on there. And with that, I will see you guys in the next review.